Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for the new episode of the podcast A Journey into Fraud Prevention. I'm your host Ivan Prokofiev. Here's the deal, I have a favor to ask you. If you ever enjoying the context of this podcast or you're enjoying this episode right now, please hit the subscribe button. It helps the podcast a lot. Additionally, it allows me to invite more and more new guests. I will do everything to improve the podcast and increase the quality of the podcast as well. Thank you, and поехали. Hi Vineet, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for joining me. It is a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
And can I ask you to introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Yes, my name is Vineet Grewal. I am currently as Wish as a senior risk manager. I am leading or managing the risk team, both merchant and buyer, as along with payments. Been here at Wish for almost 3 years now, and I have before this I was at another smaller e-commerce company. So I've worked in e-commerce, fintech, financial institutions, but by far I've enjoyed e-commerce the most.
Sounds amazing. And I believe my first question is going to be very simple. Fraud prevention. What is fraud prevention for you?
Fraud prevention for me, that's a little complex, right? Everyone has their own definition, but I would say fraud prevention for me would be multiple aspects to it. One is to make sure that, the revenue, the sales that you're bringing into the company, they're actually legitimately who they are, right? You don't want stolen financials on your platform. You want to make sure that the people that are placing the orders that are actually those people. Money laundering is always a concern, especially if you are a marketplace or a fintech. Just making sure that you're securing your platform. The other part of fraud prevention is chargebacks, which I know everyone loves so much. Making sure that you're preventing that from happening, right? Because sometimes you'll have a large attack, but you're like, hey, I never got chargebacks for this. So maybe it wasn't fraud. That's not always the case, right? So making sure that you stay under the thresholds and that you're in a good place when it comes to your chargeback programs. And I would say like the third part of fraud prevention is just having a good experience for both like your buyers and your merchants, right? Like if you're a two-sided marketplace like we are, it needs to be on both ends. And I think that's really important is because like if someone just like this morning I keep getting emails like someone's trying to reset your password for one of my things, and I was like, oh my god, why aren't they just locking my account, right? Like I would never want to use this like platform again. So creating like a good trustworthy platform I think is also another aspect of fraud prevention. So like I said, everyone has their own definition, but I feel like it's a wheel of things that kind of come all together that makes fraud prevention.
And I believe your answer can be different in case you're working not in e-commerce right now. For example, you're working in FinCrime in the bank. It's going to be a little bit different because
Yeah,
it's
you're not going to be so concerned about someone trying to get products and like resell them or anything like that. You're probably going to be more concerned about money laundering, right? Or someone trying to steal money from people's accounts. So yeah, depending on what aspect and what part of fraud you're in.
totally makes sense. And how long have you been in the industry?
Let's see. What are we in right now? 2024. It is going to be 7 years this year, or
Wow.
6 to 7 years. Yeah, 6, 7 years.
That's a lot. I mean, for 7 years, it's a lot changing in the industry. How in the industry so far? Where it's going? What's your opinion?
I think fraud is finally, and risk in as a whole is getting more of recognition and more attention than I would say previously companies were giving, as things are going, mostly everything is, right? COVID, I think, changed that a lot with people just wanting to shop online, not wanting to go to brick and mortar stores, refund abuse, things like that. A lot of things have come up, and as like people are getting more tech savvy and using different ways or knowing how to use technology to kind of get what they want, you really have to save like the bottom line, right? So it'd be great if you bring in all this money, but if at the end of the day 50% of that is cut due to fraud or chargebacks, what are you actually bringing after all the costs, right? So I think it is finally going in the direction where risk teams are actually getting the resources they need, especially if you're kind of able to prove those numbers, right? So like I always love to go in with numbers like, yes, this is what our gross GMV looks like, but after everything we've deducted with chargebacks and fraud, this is how much we actually brought in, right? So I think we're finally getting kind of like, we're not just those people that are hanging around that no one really talks to in a corner. People actually have started asking people in risk and fraud, like, hey, maybe we should ask risk, like, what are their thoughts on this, right? So I think we're not fully there yet, but it's getting there.
Yeah, I just quite realized while you're speaking that it's quite interesting going to be have a look on like from statistical perspective on two things. How's the fraud growing year over year, and we have it somewhere. It's like we see it's increased incredibly, and we need to see how many open positions like we had year over year. I believe it's going to be also quite interesting numbers. Gonna try to find how to get these statistics because I believe we will see because you might know this is like House of Fraud started posting a lot from the Brian. Yeah, and
Mhm.
I saw one of his posts to say it's 300 new positions from the past week. I just like, whoa, I'm so
Yeah.
impressed from the number.
It is impressive because, like, I think before companies would have fraud teams as just like one fraud team, right? But like now, if you have multiple different products or multiple different lines of business, you have to have it for each individual one because each individual one will have their own risk that comes with it, right? So I think now companies are starting to realize, hey, I can't just put a blanket statement on this and say, hey, risk will take care of all 20 lines of business we have. So I think that's why like it's starting to come up as like, okay, this is the type we need a risk team for this and that. I know eBay does that. Obviously, Google, Facebook, they all have that. So yeah, it's nice to see that trust and safety and risk are finally getting that recognition, and you're able to see it when it comes to job openings as well.
Cool, cool. Yeah, the most important questions: why you decided to join fraud prevention 7 years ago? What was your motivation? And another important questions: what keep you motivated to stay in this area?
Well, I feel like I actually didn't know that risk was a line of business or a line of like a career that I could go into. I had actually just finished grad school, just applying for jobs. I'm like, I don't know what I really want to do. Like, let's kind of go around. So I actually got a interview for a risk analyst position. And first I was hesitant. I was like, I don't know, like I don't know what it is, but I've heard of people talking about it before. They're like, oh, I actually used to do risk analysis and, fraud prevention. And I was like, okay, like, I'll give it a shot. And I think that was it. Like after that, I was kind of like, fraud had really was like, this is what I really like to do. My first job was at a fintech. So I would see things from money laundering, from people creating fake accounts. I mean, I still remember when somebody tried creating a account to pretend to be part of the city, and I'm like, how is the city going to have a at Gmail domain? Like that doesn't even make any sense. Like, like you at least try to pretend to be who you are. So I think that's where it really got me, where I was like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And it wasn't boring. Like every single day I would come in, it would be something new. And I think since then, I've just really enjoyed to love it. And it's ever changing. Like every single day, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that that's a thing, right? And since I've taken over payments recently, I mean, payments is a whole different realm that I'm learning about. But it's nothing. It's not boring, and I think that's why I like it. It does get frustrating when you're like, I would wish that it was just quiet. Like I just want a quiet week where nothing crazy happens. But I think if you're going to be in risk and fraud and just trust and safety in general, you just kind of always have to have like that adrenaline rush to like, you know, go for it whenever something happens.
So I believe right now you have two favorite dates in the calendar. This is like Black Fridays and Cyber Monday is your favorite days, I believe.
Yeah, luckily we start getting hit, at least what I've noticed over the past few years, fraud comes before those days. So usually around like Black Friday and stuff, it gets quiet. I feel like they start testing everything starting like August, right? So they get everything out of the way before like November because I think they expect everyone to be like fully like on their feet, like ready to go when it comes. But before the holidays, they're like, oh, maybe they're not prepared. Like this is the time to like hit. So recently in the past few years, we've noticed that a lot of fraud that we get, it starts coming around like September, October. So now I usually tell the team, I'm like, all right, it's that time of year, it's pre-holidays, like get ready. This is usually when stuff starts hitting the fan. We got to be well aware of things. So but yeah, it's always scary, like, being on Black Friday or Christmas Day, you're like, oh no, is something going to happen? They know we're off, so there's always that fear.
Yeah, everyone's so exciting. It's holidays soon. You just, yeah, it's holidays soon.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh no, this is when it could make it or break it.
Have you ever been victim of fraud?
Oh yes. I think it happens to me at least like 2-3 times a year. And I was just telling somebody on my team, and I was like, there's a specific financial institution. I will not say the name of it, but I don't use their credit card. I do have it. And I just like, I it's just sitting at home. It's not, I don't have it on any platform. For somehow that one financial institution, their credit card number that I have always gets leaked. And it is like the most bizarre thing. I was like, I go from having not spending anything on your credit card, but somehow I'm ordering, like food like across the country. Like, please make that make sense. Like, why are you guys even approving this? So yeah, I definitely have been a victim of fraud, and I feel like it happens at least a couple times a year.
Yeah, and every time and when it happens, you just like start to realize it's a simple one. It's just like, please, it's a really simple one. Have a look.
Yeah.
It's just like not rocket science. If I've showed to kid, it's like definitely spotted this kind of when it was compromised. I would like something happens.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's always this one financial institution. It's always the same credit card. Everything else, I'm like, nothing ever happens. I don't know what it is. I'm like, I wish you guys would be able to figure this out. Sometimes I just want to call them and be like, can you tell me why you guys let this through? Like, I'm just curious. Like, there's no pattern to this, But yeah, like you said, sometimes you're just like scratching your head of like, why did you let this go through? But yeah, it happens. I feel like before I got into risk, I wasn't, always putting the same passwords, not really caring. But now I'm like, no, we're gonna have 2FA. I make my entire family do it. Like, I make my parents do it. I'm like, everyone, like, you guys are gonna keep yours secure. And my parents have been victims of fraud. So when that happens, it just kind of like, you're just like, like even in my personal life, I can't get away from this.
Yeah, it's always sad when it happens with your family because in a special way when you just like share everything, sometimes they not properly listen until it happens, and after that they just like start to speak with everyone around that's supposed to be secure.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk to you about your manager experience.
Mhm.
What is necessary to jump from core senior position, or let's simplify it, from individual contributor position to become a manager in the fraud prevention area? What skills maybe you can give a bit of advice for people who like stay in this area and looking forward to become a manager?
I think one of the biggest things, and that was hard for me initially, was having to kind of step away from like the day to day analytical portion, right? So if you have the time for it, like of course you're going to spend your time, do the deep dives that you want to, but if you want to go in from being an IC into being a manager role, you will kind of have to get used to like kind of stepping back and looking at things more holistically, right? As an IC, you're mostly just focused on what you're doing and you're not looking at the full picture. But as a manager, you have to look at the entire thing, right? From the beginning to the very end. So as a manager, you're going to have to look at login, you're going to have to look at the whole journey that the customer has to go through. You're also going to have to look at the end portion of it, which is chargebacks, right? So I would say, like, if you're someone that likes to look at things holistically, that likes to look at the whole picture of things, a manager is where you would really be good at, right? And then some people are like, I just really like to work on one portion. If that's investigations, if that's just doing deep dives or doing analytical work for vendors or things like that, right? But I think as a manager, you're not just going to be like in a tunnel vision. You're going to have to look at things in different aspects. The other thing what I would have to say if you're going from an IC role to manager role is being comfortable with talking with having uncomfortable conversations with people, right? So as you become and go into leadership, you're going to have to persuade your team if they need to change their ways or if things are changing to kind of change how they do things, and then B, to get approval from upper leadership, right? So that's there's always going to be uncomfortable situations like, hey, we just had a fraud attack, we just lost X amount of money, this is what happened, this is why it happened, and they're gonna grill you, right? They're gonna ask you why it happened, why didn't you stop it, what's going on, like what are you gonna do for it next? So having uncomfortable conversations is something that you have to like be okay with. And I feel like, as an IC, your manager is always going to kind of buffer you, right? You're never going to have to like have those uncomfortable conversations with leadership. But I think as a manager, that's where you're going to have to step in and be like, this is what my team did, this is what we've been doing, but we still ended up having these losses, or this is why we're in a chargeback program, or whatever the reason is. So, and then being good with people. You're going to have to deal with a lot of different personalities as risk. You're dealing with engineers, you're dealing with, your data science, your program managers, your product managers, customer service, like being able to work with various different personalities and being able to understand where they're coming from, right? Every department has their own goals, their own KPIs. And understanding that risk sometimes people feel like is not allowing them to meet their goals or their KPIs. But in reality, we're just trying to make it all more cohesive and a lot more safer for everyone, right? So I would say just those are some of my things as like as you become a manager is like, a, starting to look at things holistically, B, having those, awkward conversations and those hard conversations. And then I would say C is just being able to deal with different personalities and different teams. And you just have to kind of understand where they're coming from. So I would say those are some of like the bigger shifts that go from being an IC to like a manager.
Yeah, you switch from more like hard skills to soft skills when you become manager. Yeah, so it's like as a portion from 80 to 20 going to 20/80, something like that. And
Yeah, you because like you're not going to be spending all your time doing analytical work, right? Like as an IC, you're used to doing deep dives, analysis, things like that. But as a manager, you're not going to have you'll still be able to do some of those things, but you're not going to be doing those 100% of the time, right? So you're definitely going to have to like kind of tap in to like your other strengths.
and do you believe the manager is supposed to be know how to work with data nowadays?
I think it's helpful. Yes, because sometimes like if your team has questions on, on like how does this data look, or at least understanding it, right? Your team might be better at doing some of the deep dives, but at least understanding the back end, right? When you're speaking with engineers, understanding what they're talking about. If you're speaking to your data analyst, at least understanding how the analysis should be done if you can't really go in and like help them with like their querying or their codes and things. So I think like yes, it'd be great if everyone was on the same page, but if you're not like, if you're just like, oh my God, data and when it comes to coding, my brain just can't wrap around how to do this, at least understanding it, having the basic knowledge. And so you could at least guide your team in the right direction because you really can't have data analysts and like other analysts on your team if you just don't understand the back end of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when it's point to hiring someone, do you have any specific tough questions you ask everyone, and that give you some understanding or visibility about person which you speak with?
Oh, that's a good question. Now I can't even think about the questions I asked during an interview. Um, I think one thing I like to just hear about is like if they had to make a decision of, if it was a fraud attack or another P0 project that they're working on, how would they kind of decide to do that, right? And I think that that's really that's at least for us on our risk team and the teams that I've been on, that's always a place that we're in, right? We're like, should we be there's a fraud attack, but then we also have this one thing that we need to push through. Like, what should we do? Right. So, kind of just thinking how the person thinks things through. I don't think there's no such thing as a right answer. I think I just like to see how a person is kind of just breaking things down in their head and like justifying it. Right. So, if you're just like, I'm not even going to worry about the fraud attack. I'm only going to work on my P0. And then I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what it is. We could lose millions of dollars, right? So I think it's just by seeing how their communication skills work with various teams when they have a lot of things on their plate, and being in trust and safety and risk, you're always going to have a lot of things on your plate, right? So just seeing how you juggle things. So I don't think I really have any other hard questions. I really just like to see how the personality is going to mesh with the team. I think that's my biggest thing is I just want to see, like, are you a team player? And if you need to drop something and help someone on the team, would you be that person, right? Are you okay with kind of being able to be like agile when it comes to just like going from one thing to another? I think that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, and the second part of the question, I don't know. Actually, I just ask myself the same questions. I'm not sure if I have answer on that one, so feel free to say you don't know. Are you looking for any particular questions from the person at the end of the interview? If yes,
Um,
is it like any specific questions you expected from a candidate to ask you?
Yeah, I mean, I want them to ask, like, hey, what do you guys currently have in place, right? Like, what does the team consist of? I want them to be curious to know, like, what's going on, like, within the team, right? Like, how are you currently doing things? What is the team structure like? Just kind of understanding it. Also, just like sometimes asking for their own feedback, right? Because I know sometimes people are afraid of like asking for their feedback. And I think that's one of the best things you could do during an interview is saying, hey, was there anything that I didn't, cover that you potentially are looking for in this person? Or is there something that you were unclear about? And honestly, I feel like that question has saved me a lot of times because they're like, oh, yeah, well, we're looking for this and you didn't mention that. I'm like, oh, I didn't mention that. Let me tell you like some of my experiences, right? So that could honestly be a savior for you to get the job because like you might have not mentioned it because you can't mention everything you've done, right? In like a 30-minute or a 45-minute conversation. So I think like those are the type of questions that I'm asking, and like just I want the person to be confident in what they are, but then at the same time kind of be okay with like being like, yes, you're right. Like maybe the way I've been doing things isn't right. So I'm willing to kind of like, kind of mold into what you need or the way things have been changing, or this is how a new thing that has been pushed out. I need to, mold myself into kind of working with something new or a new person or something like that. So yeah, I think those are some of the biggest things I want. I want someone to show that they're actually interested and they're not just interviewing for the sake of interviewing.
Great, it's amazing. I would love to participate on one of your interview one day. I mean, it's going to be interesting conversation from what I heard so far, and maybe someone for future candidates. If you're going to be hire someone, you can refer them to this episode and say, "Look, this is." I give a couple of advices, just like prepare yourself.
Yeah, that's actually a good call out.
And back to the fraud realities. That's one fraud nightmare case you just can't shake from your memory.
Oh, not only there's not one, there's like so many. Let's see. I think one of them that I will never forget is that we were getting orders from, I won't name the country, just a specific country, and it was only coming from certain bins. And they were placing the order, so it was getting through. The PSPs were approving it, but they were going and refunding it right away. And they were refunding it back to the original payment method. And they did this for millions and millions of dollars. I mean, we put in rules, we did everything that we did. They hit us during the weekend, so they literally just went rampant because the PSPs just kept approving everything. And till this day, I'm still scratching my head because I'm just like, what were they trying to do? Like, they didn't get the product because they canceled the order. They weren't that we had put in rules where you can't refund to another payment method. It has to be to the original payment method if you're a new user. So they were going back to the original payment method. I was like, it's not like they'd be racking up points on their credit card because it would go back, and it shows that you returned it. And it was only a couple of bins that it was going from. So I was like, we did some digging. We saw that it was a wallet. The only thing till this day that I could think of was maybe they were moving the money within the wallet to a different card. So it looked like we were refunding it back to the original payment method. Till this day, it was millions of dollars. We didn't lose anything. So, like, that was the good part. We didn't lose anything. But till this day, I still don't know what they were trying to do. So I've asked around. I've asked multiple other, over the years. Like I've asked, I was like, "Hey, have you guys ever heard this? Like, this happened a few years ago. What's going on?" Everyone kind of just scratches their head too, and they're like, "Huh?" So they didn't want the money or the products or anything, and I was like, "No, nothing." That one I think is always going to stick with me because I just want to know why. What was the purpose behind it? So, if you have any ideas, please let me
Actually,
know.
I do two ideas in my mind. I'm not sure if they're right or wrong, but the first idea in my mind is they getting money because of the currency exchange. So, for example, if I'm buying something today, exchange rate happens, and I refund it like 5 days afterwards, and my currency where I buy very voluntarily, it's a really drop happens, and it's huge amount. So after 5 days, I'm getting probably more money rather than I pay in the first place because my account probably in specific currency where I can get profit. It's the first idea. The second idea, it might be sounds crazy. So they try to learn your model. That's kind of this transaction is normal for particular market, a particular product. And after like certain time when the model pick up, so like if the model learn usually in 3 months, so after 3 months it's gonna be like normal trade to the model. And after 3 months, I gonna start to buy something using the same amount, and model with the less chance gonna pick up because it's not risky for the model, because in the past nothing returned as chargebacks, it was refunded. So it's I have only two ideas in my mind, but
Yeah. So for the first one, that is actually a good point. I didn't think about that, but they refunded it at the point of purchase. So they would let it get approved and then refund it immediately. They didn't wait any single time frame. They would refund it pretty much immediately. And maybe that was the case, right? Maybe they were getting, I don't know, a couple pennies or dollars or something extra when it was getting refunded, but I don't know. But yeah, it was happening immediately. They weren't even giving us a chance to do anything.
so it
Like
was
we just bought.
cancellation, not
Yeah.
refund, generally speaking.
Yeah. So that was the other one. Yeah, it could be. I don't know. And it was the thing was the model portion potentially, but the PSP got me because the PSP in that country just kept approving it and it was millions of dollars. So at this point, I'm like, was it like an inside job? Like, did this bank think that it was okay that all this money was going to the same place for like this, for around the same dollar amounts? We reached out to our PSPs as well. We're like, hey, can you reach out to this bank? And they didn't, but you know, it's a possibility. I mean, those are really good points. So I'm just like, I wish I could validate these.
It's actually when you mentioned this was cancellation, I just realized I have another two crazy ideas about it. So first one, that's probably the card or wallet related to any rewards when it happens in huge amount, and probably company who provide rewards, they're not considering cancellation and refunds as a cancel your bonus.
Yeah.
And another idea that's maybe even more crazy than with the model, that it's probably account and they try to show this account is active, and the like bank model not pick up the case when someone not using account for a long period of time, and they always get like notification. So they do this like operation, so for the bank account is keep acting, and they just like doing the next operation and not pick up the by simple rules, probably something like that.
Yeah. I mean, hey, those are all good options. I didn't think of any of those. I was just like, the banks involved. Like that was the only thing I could think of at that time. I was like, I don't know why they're approving all this. It was millions of US dollars. So I was like, that's a lot for like that country. So yeah. Um, I don't know if we'll ever have the answer to that, but hey, at least we have some good theories.
Yeah, and you can ask this one on an interview. You can ask people on an
Yeah.
interview and see how they think about something. So it's actually kind of trick opportunity to use your own story for getting benefits of that.
That's actually a good point. I should definitely bring this as like a little case study and see what people think.
Cool. I have last one,
Mhm.
last question. So for people who just right now sitting and considering to join front prevention, or for people who sitting in prevention for a long time and consider to leaving this area, what you can recommend or advise for both of these groups?
If you're thinking of joining fraud prevention or just trust and safety risk in general, I would say, I mean, I absolutely love it. So I guess I'm biased. But if you're someone who likes something that's different every day, that doesn't like to do the same thing 9 to 5, someone that's willing to learn different things and things change, right? In trust and safety and risk, like, there's always the Visa and MasterCard are always changing things, right? There's always change that happens with chargebacks. There's strategies are gonna have to change. There's different fraud attacks. Fraudsters are just getting smarter. So if you're that type of person who doesn't mind change, who actually thrives change, and wants to kind of likes the chase, I guess, it's for you. If someone who likes to kind of just do the same thing day in and day out, this might not be for you, right? And it might be maybe there's some jobs, maybe if you're like there might be some jobs in trust and safety where you do that, but when it comes to like fraud analysis, when it comes to program managers, strategy analysts, all these, like everyone that's kind of in the forefront, you're not going to have the same thing every single day. So that's how I would say it. You're going to have to be okay with being uncomfortable when it comes to fraud attacks, right? You could think that you have everything under control and a fraudster is going to get around it. So, having that patience to fight that, I think, is what you need in risk. It's not something that you're like, hey, I know what I'm going to come and do, plan out your day. Like that's not how it works, right? I plan out my day. I'm like, hey, I have all these meetings. Great. I'll be able to catch up on emails by the end of the day. That's never the case. Something new pops up every day, right? So being okay with that. Someone who's planning on leaving trust and safety and just risk, I would say I feel like people you're gonna miss it. Like I feel like once you're used to kind of like how things are happening, everything else seems like it's slow paced, right? I think when somebody gets used to it, I don't know, I guess like from personal experience, when you get used to being in such a fast paced environment where things are always like changing and you're always learning new things, and then you move over to something that you don't really learn all the time, it's kind of like the same thing, it might seem a little boring. So, you could always go in trust and safety, like in risk, you could always say, like, maybe I don't want to be a manager anymore, right? And a lot of people say that they manage for years and they're like, hey, I actually don't want that much stress or that much pressure. You could always go back to like an IC role. There's never anything wrong with it. So, I don't know. I feel like if someone's trying to come on, I would say, yes, we need more people in this realm. And someone that's trying to leave, I would just say, hey, like, if you want something more slow paced and you're like, hey, this is just too much stress, then that might be the right move for you, right? But if you're someone who actually enjoys this fast paced environment, I don't know if anything else would kind of suffice that.
Oh, it's great advices, and I agree with you 100%. And at least I buy it.
Yeah.
So, Vineet, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to hear your story, and it was amazing conversation. And this case is gonna be kill me close to the night when I just realized I have maybe some different ideas. So I'm gonna think about it for another couple of weeks. And if I have any crazy theories or just like speak with someone who knows the proper answer, I'm gonna share with you definitely.
Please do. Please do. Like I said, it's been a few years and it still bothers me. So if you have anything, I'll take any theories. If this has happened to anyone that's listening, please let me know. I would love to hear how you dealt with it. It's definitely one that's gonna stick with me.
Amazing. And I'm gonna say my favorite word on each episode at the end of each episode, which is cut.